This download the virtual machines link. It's going to ask you for a name and password, so you put in this high security stuff and log in, and now you can download stuff. You can get VMware Player, which is the product that runs on Windows, which I recommend. If you're on a Mac, I use VirtualBox, which is not, if you want something free, or VMware Fusion, if you're willing to pay something for a nicer product. And so for this class, you need Kali Linux, Windows Server 2008, and Deft. And that's why I have the password, because Linux is free to everybody, but I can't hand out Windows to just the whole world, or Microsoft will hurt me. Now I can hand it out to students because we are Microsoft Partner Academy or something, so we have the ability to give you copies of Microsoft software. Anyway, so you download this thing and you'll get a 7-zip file, which you have to unzip and then play. So the first homework that you have to do is just to get your virtual machines going. And the first two virtual machines to get going are Windows, get Windows virtual machine going, and get a Kali Linux virtual machine going, and get them both on the internet. That's it. You got to have that, then we can play games. Creating evidence on the Windows machine, getting evidence off it, and all that jazz. Now we can use Windows and Linux software, and we'll use them both in this class to do forensic investigations. Anyway, the other thing, let me bring up the rules, which are here. All right, as far as grading and such, there's a bunch of quizzes, a bunch of projects, and a final exam. So 90% of the points is an A, 80% is a B, and so on. You can take the course pass, no pass, but you have to fill out a form in the registration office within the first few weeks. If you miss it, yeah?
Somebody told us something interesting. They said that depending on the university, if people are transferring, if you do things pass, no pass, they'll treat all passes as a C and then calculate that into your GPA. So if people that are transferring, then they should look into that.
Yeah. By the way, if you're trying to get a AA degree or certificate, you can't have pass, no pass classes in that. So pass, no pass is usually a mistake. But it's not. If you're serious about the field, it's probably not something you want to do. You probably will only get a letter grade. But anyway, it is an option. If you miss a quiz, just let me know, and I will fill that in with an average from your final exam. If you have to miss a quiz, you can. And so there's final exam, of course. There's a bunch of projects. You turn in a bunch of screen images. Now, if you can do these projects at home, but if you want to use the computer lab, be aware that nothing is private in the lab. Now, the most dangerous students in that lab is you. My hackers are not as dangerous as my forensic investigators. You really can steal the machines off those passwords off those machines. So nobody should be logging into their personal accounts in there, doing shopping and all that nonsense. You should make another email account with a password you don't care about that you use to turn in homework from the lab, or save your stuff on a thumb drive and turn it in from home or something. But be aware, anything you do in the lab is not private and not protected. So you might find, and you come back next week, that whatever you did last week, somebody wiped it out. Don't panic and freak out if that happens. If it makes you late on something, I can give you an extension or something. But just be aware. If anybody is cheating, copying someone else's homework or something, then I usually just throw them out. I mean, the point here is you've got to be a good guy. You're held to a higher standard of ethics, just like cops. Once you learn computer forensics, and for that matter, computer hacking and lockpicking, most security boundaries don't exist for you anymore. You can do anything you want, and it is up to you to be mature enough not to use these abilities to get in trouble. So if you don't have enough maturity to not cheat in a class, then I don't want to teach you any of this, and you don't want to learn. You're headed for the other side. You're going to be the guy we lock up. So if somebody tries to talk you into doing something fishy, talk to me before you do it. I've had people dodge the bullet that way. Anyway, so there's a student agreement that shows that you know what you got this handout, and if I have to change anything, I'll let you know. If anybody needs any special accommodations because of a disability or something, talk to me. We'll work it out. That's of course important. Anyway, that's the grading, and I've talked about the schedule and the general outline of what the class is. So I'm inclined to just start the first chapter. All right.
What lab time?
What's that?
The lab.
Yeah, what about it?
What time is it?
I don't.
Well, online. The schedule online.
The schedule online is out of date, so I need to get a new bunch of volunteers. So if anybody wants to open the lab, let me know, and we'll pick hours. I don't have any scheduled hours yet, but we'll have them by next week. We'll have regular hours when the lab's open, but not this week. So, all right, let me get my lecture here, which is here. All right, and this, I think, is an excellent way to start out because they start out with a couple of case histories, and these are very good, especially since it's blindingly obvious what cases they really are. They're very only weakly obfuscated. So an event is something that happens on your network, like a hard drive fails or something, but an incident is a security incident. Security incident is when something violates your security policy. So hard drive failing is not enough, but some kind of malware infection usually would be, or someone doing whatever they're not allowed to do at work. So once you determine that an incident has occurred, then you activate your incident response team, if you are a company mature enough to have one, and every company is learning that they need an incident response team. So now, what they have to do first is detect what's going on and contain it. The first issue is whatever bad thing is happening, like hackers have gotten in, are they still getting further, stealing more data down, taking over more machines? First, we want to stop the fire from spreading. Then, that's containment. Then we want to determine the scope, how much damage has been done here, how big of a job is this, has it got all your locations, has it got all your servers, or is it localized, only part of the company? Then, like I say, don't just start randomly changing things to respond to the trouble, or you will just make it worse. Figure out exactly what happened, and then you have one cleaning event when you kick them all out. That's the best way to do it. That's the Mandia technique. And you're trying to do this without harming the business during the response and afterwards. You're trying to make it so the business can go to the country and the government and the agencies overseeing them and say, we're responsible and we handled this problem and fixed it, and we know how bad it was, and we will give credit monitoring or a month of free service to the customers affected or something to make it up to them. And that way you come out looking competent and heroic instead of looking like an idiot that just let people hack you and don't even know what to do about it, which is usually what happens. So you want to restore normal operations, handle public perception, figure out legal management, and be a consultant for senior management, helping them understand what has happened. This involves another skill I talk about an awful lot in my classes, which is you have to learn how to talk to non-technical people. And you have to be able to talk to them with clarity and respect. You cannot have contempt for people who are stupid and don't know technical things because they are your bosses and they run the company. And it's not even wrong that they run the company because it's an important job and it's not a technical job. So you have to be willing to translate your technical gobbledygook into things they can understand, like actionable business intelligence. Here's how much damage it did, here's how much it will take to clean up, how much money and how much time it will take to clean up, things like that. Anyway, and that's the goal. Find out how they got in and improve your security posture so people can't get in that way again. That's the goal. So the IR team has various sub-teams. The investigation team are the people that determine what's happened and determine the damage. The remediation team are people who fix the problem and kick out the attacker, and then you've got public relations, of course. Explaining this both internally to your help desk and your employees and your management, and externally to people like government regulatory agencies and the press and such. So in the old days, maybe 10 years ago and earlier, computer forensics was primarily done with a hard disk image, and the rule was when you go to a crime scene, you see a computer plugged in, you kick the plug out of the wall, do an abnormal shutdown, then you image the hard drive and you analyze that hard drive image. And this created a very strange sort of elitism. Now, legal forensics is actually very shaky stuff. You may have heard the FBI recently had to downgrade their hair examinations because it was determined in court that it wasn't reliable enough. There are many cases of rogue forensic examiners that would just lie and say people were guilty when they weren't, and use, this has happened a lot of times. But the computer forensics have bragged about being above all that. What we do is like mathematics. It's perfect and pure because we have the hard drive image, which is maybe 10 gigabytes or 100 gigabytes, and then you have a hash value, and you can make another copy of it and give a copy to the defense and a copy of the prosecution, and they are 100% identical. And when they analyze it, they're going to find exactly the same files and data. So we don't have any vagueness or confusion about what we're doing. And that was never true, but it's really not true anymore, because now the most important evidence is in RAM. The most important evidence is downloads in progress, malware living in RAM, extra processes running that shouldn't be there, DILs injected into processes. So if you turn off the machine, you lose the important data. So now you have to take an image of a running system. That's called live forensics. Now there is no way to take an image of a running system without altering it. You have to run a program on it to collect the image, and that changes it. So now we are no better than people analyzing a blood splatter. You wrap up the blood, you put it in some machine. You can't mop up that same piece of blood again and get another identical sample. You just have to do it right the first time, and you have to know what changes you made and what changes really indicate guilt. And we're in the same boat now.
Is that what?
Yeah.
Volatility?
Yeah, volatility is an issue there. Yeah, that volatility is the order in which data is lost. And for example, in the cases where people are downloading child porn, they would try to find a machine, go to the hard drive, find a bunch of porn, and try to convict people, and they would often get off by saying someone else put it on there. So in order to actually win in court, the way they do it now is they have a little thing that looks like a meter that the cops buy that measures the amount of traffic passing through nearby wireless networks. And so they monitor the guy watching from the bushes, see he drives home after work, he goes into his room, he goes up, turns on his light, he turns on his computer, and you watch until the meter goes up, he's downloading stuff right now. Then you get a guy wearing a UPS uniform to knock on the door with a package. He opens the door, you wrestle him to the ground and run up there. It's coming down right now. That's what you have to really convict him. So he can't argue. And that's not on the hard disk. That's in the RAM.
Speaking of the tool, isn't there a tool called volatility too?
Yes, and we'll be using it. Volatility is the main tool you use to collect and analyze RAM.
That's what I was just
Yeah. Anyway, so here's a couple of cases. This one here, in my opinion, is Target. It seemed pretty obvious to me that it's Target. They don't want to violate your non-disclosure agreement, but it sure looked like Target to me. So here's how it started. In January, they found a SQL injection vulnerability. We go through it quite a lot in the hacking class. SQL injection is a very common vulnerability. About 11% of websites have it, and it means you can insert commands into things that ought to be harmless, like usernames and address fields and such, and run them on the server. So you can execute commands on the server as if you had a command shell, essentially. So this guy managed to get on the web server. Now this is very common and usually not the end of the world in itself, because you shouldn't be putting anything confidential on the web server. So compromising the web server itself is a relatively small issue, but they got that, and they used this XP command shell, which is a SQL, Microsoft SQL command that gives you a command shell on the server. So now, they were able to get command execution on the database server by coming through the web server, because the web server passes commands to the database server, and you can, if you pass the XP command shell command to the web server, you get a command on the database server, which is now much more serious because the database server typically does contain confidential information like customer addresses and account numbers and such. So now they download malware and run it on the database server, and now they can escape the DMZ. Now this is the way modern networks have been designed, as is recommended for a long time. You have the internet, then you have a firewall protecting your public servers, like your web server, your email server, and that's in a demilitarized zone. And this would be, I guess, only the public data. Here's your proprietary data. You have a second connection here with another firewall that limits access, so only real employees can get in here. Anybody on the web can get here. That's the idea. So now they're going to break out of the DMZ. They want to break across this boundary here to get to the real crown jewels that are in the second layer of protected network. This is called defense in depth, and it's what everyone must do because people are bringing in laptops from home that are infected, and they put BitTorrent on it and all sorts of horrible things and taking them to work. So some machines are infected in your network. I've heard an estimate that something like 11% of all corporate machines are infected. So you don't have a clean, trusted network, so you better have layers of defense. So even though there's a problem, the problem has barriers to spreading to the really important stuff. So then the attacker spent weeks performing reconnaissance. The typical company that is hacked doesn't find out for, I think, 18 months. And 80% of them only find out because the FBI comes and tells them, we caught these crooks and we found your data on their server. They never figure it out at all from their own network monitoring. A proper hacker, unless you do something ridiculous like deface their web page, it won't be easy to notice that you're doing something because they have all these business processes running around and customers and employees and developers. So if you don't make a mess, they won't notice you poking around. So he spent weeks scanning the network, and then he implanted a backdoor. He extracted the password hash for the local administrator account on the second database server, internal database one, and now he had local administrator on most systems. So he exploited the domain controller, put in keyloggers, got a lot of password hashes, and now that he had infected the domain controller, he had access to many accounts, many developers. So then he planted more than 20 backdoors all through the system. This is, of course, what you do because any one thing you do, you might get caught, or somebody might change something, or a system might get re-imaged or upgraded or something, and take out your backdoor. So if you want to stay in there, you put in a lot. And that's why I say people that will now like re-image the one server that's infected and call it a day are just fooling themselves. And then he sort of brought down a custom malware creation kit, which allowed him to modify binaries to escape antivirus, which is extremely easy to do. Just like I said, picking locks is so easy, you just have to try it and you'll find out it's a joke. The same thing as sneaking things past antivirus. If you just try the first thing that comes to mind, it will work. Antivirus is pathetic against a targeted attacker. So he has this backdoor family of malware. He can upload and download things. He can tunnel remote desktop protocol traffic in, so he can have graphic control of Windows machines with the mouse, which is what people use. And he can move traffic between his various backdoors. So he's got command and control traffic, and he's encrypting it. This is pretty common these days. The way this is done, you have a command and control machine. The infected machines connect with that machine, and it tells them what to do. That's where they go to get orders. And in the old days, this was just done with IRC traffic. But nowadays, modern layer 7 firewalls will catch that, so people encrypt the traffic in various ways. And he used RC4, which is one of the simpler encryption routines. And he designed persistence through DIL load order hijacking. This is a technique we talk about in the malware analysis class. It is also called a companion Trojan. Unfortunately, Microsoft has a fundamental flaw in their operating system, which has been around since Windows NT, which is when it loads a file, a DIL, a library used by running program, you don't have to specify the full path for the file. It will guess where the file is. Same thing's true when you type start run and type CMD. It has to guess what CMD do you mean. So you can put a fake DIL in an earlier spot in the search path, and it will load that instead of the real DIL. So this is a way to sneak malware into programs. And that's what he did here. Persistence means that the malware will keep running even if the machine restarts. You have somehow tied it to the start to boot up order, so it'll restart a copy of the malware too when you restart the server. And DIL load order hijacking is one of the many ways to do that. So he has a proxy malware family that redirects traffic. And now you can tunnel traffic through DNS queries and responses, which is also extremely common. When you want to send commands to the commands from the command and control server and data out that you're stealing, you want to encrypt it somehow. And what you typically do, one common trick is just put it in DNS requests. You ask for some server with just a long name, like AX4297334AB.ccsf.edu or something. And this long random string of junk is not a real name of a server, but it'll pass through all your security appliances as the name of some server. It's encrypted data. And you can do the same thing with the response. The response can have a long canonical name or something, so you can move structured data in and out, and it just looks like DNS traffic. You can do the same thing with HTTP traffic. You can send GET requests to load web pages with long, stupid names and get responses. And it just looks like web traffic, but it isn't. Anyway, so that's another one. So by late March, it's now been in there in the third month of the infection. The attacker stole some data, took usernames and passwords and network information. They're still not getting the crown jewels, which is customer credit card numbers. They're still just getting information about the network. So now in the third month of researching the network. That's why, this is like those bank heists that you see in caper movies where these guys are really not messing around and they're willing to spend months studying the problem to really get to the guarded crown jewels. So now he wants to steal financial data, an outbound FTP connection, and compresses it. There's a thing called a jump server, which is the gateway into the restricted financial environment. So you have the normal environment internal to the network, and then you have this jump server, which puts you in the financial machines, which are processing financial transactions and storing financial transactions. And because this is a secure enterprise, they have many security barriers. And so even though you're out of the DMZ in the internals, you have to go through another barrier here to get into the financial stuff, as they should be, protecting their data. So to get in PCI data is the numbers for swiping credit cards through MagStripe readers. There's track 1 and track 2. They basically have the same data. Either one's good enough to do quite a lot of transactions with it. So he compromised the jump server. He stole the domain administrator password earlier with either a keylogger or by cracking the hash, and they did not use two-factor authentication here, which in retrospect was a mistake. If they had, and you had to have not only the password but something like a magnetic card, they wouldn't have been able to get in as easily. But he managed to take over the jump server and put recon tools on it, and now he could recon into the restricted financial environment and see what was there. So he stole the password hashes from RAM, which is an extremely powerful technique, and you'll be doing it in one of the first few projects, stealing data from RAM. That's what makes me think of Target in addition to the scale of it, because Target did lose all its data from RAM scrapers. RAM typically has all your sensitive data in a non-encrypted form. By the way, I don't know why programmers don't do this. There is a variable type which Microsoft added to Visual Studio in 2004 called a temporary data type, where the data will only be used, and as soon as you're not using it, it will be erased. So it doesn't linger in memory. It's available, but nobody uses it. Data just hangs out in memory even when you're not using it. Anyway, so he spent another 2 months finding things. The systems that had, he's looking for systems that have the data, have cardholder data, and he's looking for systems that can get to the internet. And he found, and he got the documents describing the network, and he found plenty of machines that handle data, but none of these machines are allowed to connect directly to the internet, which is, again, the way it should be for security. They can only come through your gateway, through your multiple stages of other servers, so that you can't just get out. So he found 90 systems, none of them are connected directly. So what he did was he set up a chain of proxies. He infected these machines with malware, stealing the credit card numbers from RAM, and then sent them to the jump serve, and then sent it to the mail server, and then was able to leave out because the email server, of course, can get to the internet. So by compromising all these machines, he can set up processes that filter, proxy, and encrypt the traffic, and sends it off. And he sent a lot of it as TCP/88, which I think is Kerberos. So that's a port that's in common use for login information on Windows networks, so there's a lot of traffic on it. So adding a little more traffic is hidden pretty well behind innocent traffic. And so he put the sysinternals PS suite on the financial processing machine, looked at the running processes, and dumped the memory from the running processes, which is just what you're going to do in Project 3 or 4. And then at this point, he compressed the entire memory of the process and sent it out because he's trying to find which process has the credit cards. And then after that, he spent 2 days analyzing the files he stole, and he wrote a custom attack tool called Card Harvest that would only go to the right process and only steal the right data from that process instead of stealing all the unnecessary stuff to make it more efficient and smaller. Yeah?
You did so much work and then you named it something obvious like Card Harvest?
Probably, or these names might be fake.
Okay.
So anyway, this is something that would then, every 15 seconds it would look for credit cards. It would do a hash to make sure it didn't bother stealing the same credit card twice. Then encrypt it with RC4 on a hard-coded key, and then send it to a local file so it can be snuck out, which is all pretty awesome. And it's pretty difficult to catch any of this kind of activity using typical security scanners. So over the next 3 months, he stole millions of credit card records from all 90 systems. After 10 months of exploitation, somebody finally noticed. Because this guy was pretty professional, or this team of people, whoever did this, they were really pretty careful to hide. But somebody eventually noticed that the mail server was connecting to things in a foreign country over port 80, and your mail server shouldn't be surfing the internet. And that's kind of weird. So they looked at the mail server and triage, which, take a quick look at things to just decide if this is like bad, nasty attack stuff or is this normal business stuff. They figured out this was, in fact, an attack on the mail server, sneaking some kind of data out, and that was a clue that something bad had happened here. So now they called Mandia and hired them to come in. These guys come in like the NHTSA that comes in when an airplane crashes. You fly in this team, they analyze all the data and figure out what to do to save you. So they came in immediately, made a containment plan. They did a incident investigation and planned an eradication event, which took 2 months of investigating it and finding it. And the eradication event is where they fix everything. You don't just re-image one server, you re-image all of them, change the firewall rules, update the intrusion detection systems, so to close all the ways they got in. So they're out, all their backdoors are gone, and all their attacks don't work anymore. That's the only way to really get rid of these kind of people. Yeah?
And they just let it go business as usual for the 2 months it takes them to prepare?
I've heard different stories about that. One company, it does seem like a poor idea to let them keep stealing things. So one of the Mandia guy that came and talked here said one thing they did at one client was they carefully corrupted the files that were being uploaded. So it looked like it was running, but in fact the files were not useful anymore. But you try to make it so that the bad guys don't know you're onto them, because you're still trying to make sure you found all of their tools and everything.
Like the Enigma.
What's that?
The Enigma, that movie, and they did that. Like
Yeah.
They kept things going.
Yeah, you do want to keep the bad guys not knowing you're there while you analyze. Because if you just find one problem and fix it, they have 10 other problems you don't know about. So you have to find it all first. And so that's the game. The investigation team analyzed all these machines and has to be able to search for them on all these things you have to do. Analyze Windows Analytics software. The remediation team has to have a containment plan to stop it from happening, and then have a comprehensive approach to develop this sweeping eradication event that will really fix all the problems at once. And of course, they have to work around the fact that you're a huge corporation and you don't want to stop business. So you want to have plans to somehow transfer the business functions to another server as much as possible to not create lengthy outages. And so anyway, that was the first case, which sounds like target to me, although it could have been anything. But and so the next one was one with the certificate of authenticity. And here, this seems like a much less professional attack game. Instead of getting in through SQL injection, they got in through spear phishing. Spear phishing is deadly. It is how almost all penetration testers get in. The success rate of a carefully written spear phishing email is something like 20%. Which spear phishing is where you don't just send a generic email saying your PayPal account is compromised. You research the target first, and you send an email that's plausible. So if you wanted to take over City College, you would send an email saying, the ACCJC is shutting down the college, we're having to lay off staff, open this PDF to see which staff are being fired, or tell them a parking lot is being repaved and here's the new map of something. You say something's really happening that people will get emotional about, and now they'll open the attachment. And almost everybody falls for this. This is how China hacked RSA, to conceal our RSA tokens with emails like this. Anyway, so he sent 100 spear phishing emails to targets, to people who had attended a conference in around like network security or network management. So they were getting their technical staff and people who are connected to someone. So they knew they were the techs, the people who have the privileges they want, not just average users. And they carefully crafted a message they would want to read. So somebody, a lot of these had local administrative privileges, although they weren't the domain administrator, and somebody opened the mail. So Bob opened this thing with Adobe Acrobat, which was vulnerable. They now installed GhostRat, a very famous, very common remote access tool that lets you remotely control a machine. And so now he has control of BobSys1 from the command and control server. This is the kind of stuff any sort of average sort of anonymous level hacker can do. Not the last one was up to sort of nation state level of complexity. This is more like an ordinary garden variety hacker. So now, 2 days later, performed reconnaissance on BobSys1. Bob was an engineer. Bob had the privilege of VPNing in from home. And he logged in with a certificate, username and password, all of which were on that machine. So he stole all of Bob's credentials. Now he can, and cracked the passwords with Mimikatz. Mimikatz is a tool that, among other things, lets you steal passwords from RAM and decrypt them. A very powerful tool. So now he had all the credentials to log in as Bob. This is all the information he needed. Now he can just VPN from anywhere in the same way Bob would VPN from coffee house or home, which is pretty awesome. So 1 week later, he connected from his home machine, the machine they named Home 3, and that's another clue, this guy's kind of an amateur. He used remote desktop protocol, and then he didn't close the session properly. He just clicked the X, and when you do that, it puts an error log saying session abnormally terminated, and it puts the host name and IP address of the machine that connected in the log. So they knew his IP address in Texas and the name of his machine. And like you may have noticed if you look on the wireless network or something, my machine is named Sam's MacBook Pro. They're often a name that you really don't want everyone knowing if you're doing crime. Anyway, so then he spent 2 weeks performing recon, installed Keyloggers, and he found their Outlook web access server so you could read email, and he has plenty of stolen credentials, so now he can log into people's email and read their emails. So 2 weeks later, he starts stealing business critical data from a Sense1 file share, which is engineering data for a new product. There were access control lists that would only let certain engineers in, but he had administrator rights, so he could just modify the access control list and let Bob in and go in as Bob. And that's what he was doing. So it took 4 weeks. He stole data, encrypting files, and uploading them. Then he tried to run, this is another clue that you're dealing with an amateur here. He would create files, upload them to an FTP server, delete the file, and then run defrag to get rid of them. Now, defrag doesn't really clean up all the empty space on a disk. There are better utilities to do that. We'll be using some of them. It's a little bit better than nothing, but this is a really dumb move. This is someone that doesn't really understand how hard disk storage works right, to think that defrag is going to fix the problem. Especially, by the way, the Windows defrag, which is completely useless and doesn't even do a proper defrag. So, I mean, there are other tools like Eraser that you should use to do this, but he didn't do it. eraser and steganography are tools that really clean the hard drive they're not using. So then, 2 weeks after he began stealing data, they noticed they tried to test a new SIM device, like Alien Vault or something. The SIM device is a device that collects logs from all your servers and routers and switches and firewalls and everything, and then lets you search through them. And it comes with canned search queries that look for known kinds of attacks. So it's showed that Bob is logging from multiple IP addresses at the same time, and even on multiple days. So obviously somebody has compromised Bob's credentials, and they're using them, and it's not Bob. That's the kind of thing a SIM can tell you. You can say how many connections are there with this username. Show me all of them. So now they disabled Bob's account, and he immediately started using somebody else's account, Mary's account. So they said, well, this is bad. He doesn't only have Bob's credentials, he's got other people's credentials. And this is when they say, well, it's time for us to stop messing around and call for professional help. We've got an incident here. Somebody has penetrated our network, and they're doing nasty things beyond our capacity to fix with our typical stuff. Yeah.
You have an extra IM.
Yeah? Yeah. I'll let it go for one. Anyway, yeah. So now you call real IR, and what these guys did, what Mandia did when they got there, was they found the IP addresses. They list all the IP addresses he's been using to do this VPN. So now they have a list of data to try to find suspicious data. So now they looked at all the traffic going to those IP addresses that you know are controlled by the attacker, and they found that the Ghost Rat is sending beacons. When you infect a machine and put it under remote control, it sends regular beacons back, like every 30 minutes or something. It'll send a packet back just to tell you, I'm still here, I'm still available, awaiting commands. So you know when it's gone. And the beacons are often the way you catch them in malware. So that helped them find this infection, and they performed a comprehensive eradication event. So 2 days after the eradication event, they discovered that he was trying to access Outlook Web Access with many passwords. And the problem is they did issue like a notice to everybody change their password, but they didn't force them to change their password, and not everybody did within 2 days. So he was still getting in people's emails. So they had to do a second enterprise level password change, which would then disable any account that didn't change their password within 24 hours to make sure everybody really changes their password. And that got him out. So you notice the attack was much weaker, the defense was much simpler, the cure was much simpler, as you'd think. There's different levels of cure required here. And here's the diagram of this thing. So he came from the internet up there, and had these VPN accounts to these machines, reconned the sensitive servers, and was able to keep running webmail accounts here. There's not a clear path in that record, it just shows you the devices that were used here. Here's the life cycle. A lot of people talk about the attack life cycle and such. So first you have some kind of initial compromise. Now, by the way, before this, you have outside research of the company, fingerprinting. You Google them, you read their corporate documents, you read their forum posts from their administrator to find out how to do the spear phishing. You find out something about what's going on there. And the more you find out, the better. Like the names of the senior staff, what kind of technology they use, what skills are on the resumes of the people they're using. This all will help you later. The more of this you do, the better. But then you come in and exploit somehow. Find some kind of way in, like spear phishing or a SQL injection or something. Then you put in custom malware and have command and control servers, so now there are machines there that are under your control. And then you escalate privileges and try to pivot to take over more machines. So you have to escalate yourself to administrator on this machine, steal the password hashes, and you can use the hashes as they are on many Windows networks to log in, or you can crack them to get the passwords. And then you try to maintain your presence and move laterally through the network. And then you can complete your mission. Find whatever the goodies are you came for, and figure out how to steal the data and how to sneak it off the network without getting caught. And like I say, the Chinese are the kings of this. They've been owning American companies for like the last 8 years that we know of, and they are really not messing around. And when they hacked Google, for example, in 2010, they put malware on there that would, not only malware that's calling home now, they put malware that will sleep for 3 months and then wake up and call home. And then they put malware that will sleep for 3 years and then wake up and call home. So when you think it's clean, it wakes up and calls home and you're infected again. And, these guys are really not messing around. And that's why it takes a real IR team to fix them. So, anyway, let me stop my recording, which, again, I don't know how to do. There, that'll do it. Okay. All right.